let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing, and you haven't, there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, the easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbles towards you and, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair, doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask, and things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it a name, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. One of the things that's very strange about a phoenix is that, well, it's immortal, but in a strange way, it lives and lives, I think, 100 years, and it gets older and older, and then one day, poof, it bursts into flames and turns into an egg, and then you get a new phoenix. So that's a symbol of transformation. It's a symbol of transformation. The bird is a spirit or psyche. And so here's what it means, in part. You know how when you learn a lesson in your life that's not very pleasant? Right? It's not like when you learn something important, it's the best day of your life. It's often
the importance of what you learn is often proportionate to just how wretched it is to learn it. You know, you learn things the hard way. You learn things by getting hit, because obviously if what you're doing is working, you get what you want. There's no learning in that, and that's happy. It's when you're doing something and you hit an obstacle, and maybe you bloody well hit it hard, and then, you know, you recoil, and then you down into the depths you go, and you have to sort yourself out, and you realize that you're, you know, this particular kind of idiot, and that you should probably fix that, and that's really annoying and difficult, and, you know, and maybe you're down in the dumps and anxious for quite a while, and then you get it repaired more or less, and, you know, you put yourself back together. That's the phoenix. Poof, into flames, bang, egg, new you. And so, you know, that's the ability to learn. Now, human beings are very strange creatures, right? Because we're very malleable compared to most animals, you know, like grizzly bears now and grizzly bears 1,000 years ago. It's like, whatever. They're the same thing. They do the same thing. There's no transformation. But human beings, we have this massive brain, and, you know, it's a pain because it means you have to take care of human children until they're 40, and and that's a big burden. And so, you know, we pay a big price for it. It also makes childbirth very difficult, and it's costly. You have to eat a lot because you have a big brain, because it uses up a lot of energy. And so, you know, you pay a price for it. But the advantage is you're plastic. You can learn. Now, learning is a strange thing, because you could think of it as just acquiring more information, but you could also think of it, and this is more accurate, as finding out something that you're doing wrong, so that's sort of built into you, like a character element of your character, a presumption of your perception, or a deep habit. It's really built into you. It's a neural structure, right? It's alive, and you have to kill it because it isn't working properly. And the pain that you go through, in part, when you're suffering because you did something stupid, is it's something like the neurology. I can never get this quite right. It's the pain of the death of that structure, and that can be a huge chunk of you, you know, if you really have to go through a massive revision. It's like the person that comes out the other end might hardly be the same at all. You know, that happens, for example, if you're trying to combat alcoholism, which is just, you know, a wretched thing to do, because, well, all your friends are alcoholic, all your family drinks too much. The only thing you know how to do when you're socializing is to go to the bar and drink too much. You know, and you spend like 20 hours a week on it. It's like, it's not just that you're addicted to the substance, it's like that's how you live. And so if you want to stop being an alcoholic, not only do you have to stop drinking alcohol, but you have to stop seeing all your drunk friends, and maybe you've had them for your whole life, and you have to have continual battles with your drunk family, and then you have to figure out something to do with that 20 hours that's now like hanging around your neck like an albatross. And so you have to let that whole part of your personality die, and a new part has to spring forth. And that's what the phoenix is. And the phoenix is the capacity of the person to transform.
You have all seen this video where you watch the basketballs being tossed back and forth between members of the white team versus the black team, and while you're doing that, a gorilla walks up into the middle of the video and you don't see it. It's like, you know, if you thought about that experiment for about 5 years, that would be about the right amount of time to spend thinking about it, because what it shows you is that you see what you aim at. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so, because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at, right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, you know, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. You know, they get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask.
To navigate there's two things you need to know. And the first is, where the hell are you? Exactly, precisely, right? Razor sharp. What's good about you and what's bad about you? By your own reckoning. You don't have to, you can ask other people, but this is a game you play yourself. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm taking stock. What is it that's okay about me and what needs some work? And you got to watch to not be too self-critical when you're doing that too, because that can just be another kind of flaw. And then the next is, okay, well, where are you going? What's your destination? Well, and that's what the frame is. Now, you could do that in a very sophisticated way. And you do that by thinking consciously about who it is that you are in an articulated manner and where you want to go and why and how you're going to get there. And people hardly ever do that. That's come as such an absolute shock to me as an educator. Because one of the other programs, I use this in my classes, one of the other programs in this suite of programs is called the Future Authoring Program, and I started developing it in my Maps of Meaning class, which is where some of this material is from, and I got students to write about their past. It's like, okay, we're talking about stories, so let's tell your story. Who are you? How did you get here? And what are you now? That usually helps people put things to rest, although it's quite stressful while you're doing it. Stress goes up when you're doing it, and maybe you feel miserable for a couple of weeks, and then stress goes down and it stays down. So that's also why people don't do it, because who the hell wants to have their stress go up? But if it's temporary, it's a sacrifice. So then the next issue is, well, where are you going? And one of the things that, and this I cannot understand, these students that had been in education system for 15 years, 14 years, high-end students, most of them, not once in their whole bloody life did anyone ever get them to sit down for like a day and say, all right, justify your existence. Like, well, seriously, it's like here you are in university, you're taking a bunch of courses, you've got some sort of vague career plan. It's like, defend the damn thing a bit, since you're going to go live it and everything. You're staking everything on it. It's like, what's your damn plan? And why are you so convinced that it's not the plan of a babbling fool? Because if you haven't thought about it, then it is. And if you really want to go out there and live that out, one of the things Carl Jung said was that you're in a story, whether you know it or not. And then he made two nice comments about that. If it's someone else's story, you're probably going to get a bit part. And it might not be the one you want. And if it's a story that you don't know, it might be one with a really bad ending. Or maybe it's just bad period with a worse ending. And if you don't know what the story that you're living out is, maybe that's the one. Maybe you got that from your mother, you got it from your grandmother, you got it from your aunt, or God only knows where you picked it up, because you pick up things like mad, because that's what human beings are like. So maybe you're living a malevolent tragedy unconsciously. And then one thing you might ask yourself is, well, how wretched and miserable is your life? Let's add futile to that. How wretched, miserable, and futile is your life? And you might say, well, yeah, 70% on each count. It's like, then you're probably unconsciously living out a malevolent tragedy. And maybe that's not for the best. So anyways, we got students to start writing in detail about not what they wanted. It's not a career thing. Because that's the closest people usually get, is they have a career plan. It's like, no, it's not a career plan. That's peripheral. Important, but peripheral. It's like, all right, you got 3 years, man. You're going to live them anyways. Devote those 3 years to setting the world up around you so that it's the best it could possibly be for you. As if you were taking care of yourself, as if you cared for yourself. Well, what would that look like? Let's say, just for the sake of argument, if you figured out where you were, that you could have what would be best for you. Well, what is that? I bet you never asked. People don't ask. And so life comes at them like random snakes, and they sort of fend them off. And life goes by, and things don't work out the way people expected them to. But a huge part of that is they didn't know where they were because they wouldn't look, or didn't know that they should look. Ignorance and willful blindness, right? Two great catastrophes. And they never figured out where they wanted to go or why. Now, there's a problem with figuring out where you want to go. And the problem is that you make your conditions for failure clear to yourself. And people don't like that. So if you keep yourself in the fog, then you can't tell when you screwed up. Now that isn't so good because you're still screwing up. You're just too blind, self-blind to notice. Although in the short term, that's less painful. If you make your criteria for success razor sharp, then you know every time you screw up. But that's great because then you could fix it. You could either repair the behavioral inadequacy or the conceptual inadequacy that you're using as a tool in that situation, or maybe you could adjust your damn plan. Either way, you can fix it. Abraham is self-conscious, that's what this commentary says, but the thing is he moves forward despite that. He's self-conscious and he knows the danger, but he moves forward despite that. And that's actually the appropriate response in the face of actual non-naive understanding of what constitutes life. Like if you're naive and you move forward, it's like, well, what the hell do you know? You know, there's no courage in naivety because you don't know what there is to stop you. You don't know what dangers you might apprehend. But to be aware of what it is that your problem is, so to be alert existentially, let's say, or to be fully self-conscious means that you're perfectly aware of your limitations and how you might be hurt. And then to make the decision to move forward into the unknown and the land of the stranger. Anyways, I would say that's one of the secrets to a good life. And I can say that really without fear of contradiction, I would say, because the clinical literature on this is very, very, very clear. What you do with people who are afraid, and to some degree depressed, but certainly anxious, is you lay out what they're anxious about, first of all, in detail. What is it that you're afraid of? What might happen? And then you decompose it into small problems, hypothetically manageable problems, and then you have the person expose themselves to the thing that they're afraid of, and what happens isn't that they get less afraid. That isn't what the clinical literature indicates exactly. What happens instead is they get braver. And that's not the same thing, right? Because if you get less afraid, it's like, well, the world isn't as dangerous as I thought it was, you know, silly me. If you get braver, that's not what happens. What happens is, yeah, the damn world's just as dangerous as I thought, or maybe it's even more dangerous than I thought, but it turns out that there's something in me that responds to taking that on as a voluntary challenge and grows and thrives as a consequence. And there's no doubt about this. Even the psychophysiological findings are quite clear. If you impose a stressor on two groups of people, and on one group the stressor is imposed involuntarily, and on the other group the stressor is picked up voluntarily, the people who pick up the stressor voluntarily use a whole different psychophysiological system to deal with it. They use the system that's associated with approach and challenge, and not the system that's associated with defensive aggression and withdrawal. And the system that is associated with challenge is much more associated with positive emotion and much less associated with negative emotion. It's also much less hard on you because the defensive posturing system, the prey animal system, man, when that thing kicks in, it's all systems are go for you, you know. The gas is pushed down to the pedals pushed down to the metal and the brakes are on. You're using future resources that you could be storing for future time right now in the present to ready yourself for emergency. So there's nothing simple or trivial at all about the idea of being called to move forthrightly forward into the strange and the unknown. And there's a real adventure that's associated with that, right? So that's an exciting thing, which is part of the reason why people travel. And then also to see yourself as the sort of creature that can do that, is willing to do that on a habitual basis, is also the right kind of tonic for, I hate this word, for your self-esteem. You know, because the self-esteem has nothing to do with feeling good about yourself. As I already mentioned, there isn't necessarily a reason why a priori you should just feel good about yourself. But if you can view yourself acting in a courageous and forthright manner and encountering the world and trying to improve your lot and taking risks, you know, in a non-naive way, well, then you have something that you can comfort yourself with at night when you're wondering what the whole damn point of your futile and miserable life. And that's necessary because it's often the case that you wake up at 4 in the morning, or at least sometimes the case that you wake up at 4 in the morning when things haven't been going that well and wonder just what the hell the point is of your futile and miserable life. You have to have something real to set against that. It can't be just rationalizations about how, you know, you're a valuable person among others, even though that's true. That's not good enough. You need something that's more realistic to set against that. And observing courage in yourself is definitely one of the things that can help you sleep soundly at night when things are destabilized a little bit around you.
How do you reach a young person who's bought into the notion that life is meaningless?
Well, the first thing is you tell them why they think that. It's like they've got all sorts of reasons to think that. It's like life is hard. It's a crucifixion. That's right. And so it's no wonder they think that. It's like, okay, fine. First of all, we're going to take it seriously. Yeah, you're suffering and adrift, and you have your reasons. So you take those reasons seriously, and you say, despite that, there's more to you than you think. And you know that too, because you upbraid yourself for not manifesting it. And you say to people, well, I ask people, for example, well, who do you admire? Because that instinct for admiration is part of the instinct for imitation. It's like, who do you admire? You admire people who are completely irresponsible. You admire people who can't take care of themselves. They can't even take care of themselves. Here's the most admirable person. Completely useless to themselves, maybe even counterproductive. Just a bloody catastrophe for their family, and like, what would you call? A social danger. Like, no one admires that. No one admires that. It's like you start minimally. Can you take care of yourself? At least that. That'd be the first thing. And then is there enough to you so that maybe someone else could rely on you now and then? And maybe a number of people, maybe your family. You could be the glue that holds them together and mends them. And then maybe there could be more to you than that. Maybe you could be someone for your community, and God only knows how far you could go with that. Those are the people you admire. It's like, well, try that out. See what happens. And start locally. Carl Jung said, this is one of my favorite Carl Jung quotes, he said, modern man does not see God because he will not look low enough. I really like that. And so, I've been telling the people that I talk to the same thing. It's like, you have a certain amount of potential within your grasp. You may find what you have contemptible because you're not in a position of power. This modicum of possibility that's been granted to you is beneath you. And so you do nothing with it. And so you get nothing from it. You take that seriously. You do the small things you can, the humble things that you can to put yourself together in those tiny, embarrassing ways that are real. And if you do that enough, you'll fortify yourself. And that will work. And one of the things that's been unbelievably heartening to me, it's ridiculous, really. Like, normally now, if I go out during the day, if I go to any city, I've been to like 150 cities in the last year, and if I'm walking around on the street or in an airport, someone will come up to me about every 10 minutes or so, and they'll say the same thing. They always say the same thing. They first of all apologize for bothering me, and they're very polite. So all my interactions with people, you'd never guess this from like my reputation in the press, but all my interactions with people in public are unbelievably positive. And the people will come up and say, I was in this small domain of hell a year ago or 6 months ago, whatever it is, addiction, alcoholism, I wasn't getting along with my family. I'd been living with my girlfriend for 5 years and we were stuck. I didn't have any direction for my career. I was nihilistic, I was whatever. All the different ways that people can fall into a pit and be miserable. He said, I read your books or I watched your lectures and I decided I was going to try to put my family together. Or I was going to make a vision and pursue it. Or I was going to try telling the truth. I was just going to try one of these things. And things are way better, way better. Things I've been suggesting to my audiences, it's one of the rules in my book, is that you should tell the truth, or at least you shouldn't lie. It's like, you can't tell the truth because what the hell do you know? But you cannot lie. Like each of us knows when we're about to utter something that isn't true. Now, sometimes maybe you're confused about it because you're ignorant and you're biased, and so you say something and it might be true and it might not be, but you're not clear about it. But sometimes it's pretty damn clear that you say something or you do something that you know perfectly well not to be true, and you do it anyways. And the proposition that Genesis puts forward is, if you act in truth, then the order you produce is good, regardless of how it appears. It's an axiomatic statement of it's an axiomatic ethical proposition that the job of whatever extracts order from chaos is properly done if it's done in truth. And that's worth thinking about, because it might be true. And then the question is like, well, do you believe it's true? That's a good question. It's not a religious question even, it's a practical question as far as I'm concerned. And my sense is that people just believe that this is true, deeply. And the way you can tell that is not by what they say, but by what they do. And so, for example, one of the things that you might observe is that, you know, if you love someone, your children, let's say, you don't tell them that the best way to get through the world is to lie about everything all the time. You don't sit them down and say, look, this is a corrupt enterprise, and altogether, and you can't trust anyone because they're always lying about everything. And your job is to become the best liar you possibly can become, because that's the way to get to where you need to get to and to set the world straight. No one ever does that. And so, if they don't do that, which would be belief in the lie, then they must assume something that's approximately opposite. And I would say that most people are not pleased when they catch their children in a lie. And so then you have to ask, well, why is that? It has to be because people believe that the truth is the proper way to proceed. And it isn't obvious why they believe that, but it's obvious that they act as if they do believe that. It's an unbelievably positive thing to see, and it's a real thing. You know, it's like it's so interesting to watch the fact that all people have to do is put some of these things into practice, and all of a sudden that little modicum of potential that they had, because they got humble enough to deal with it properly, starts to expand and expand. And like I believe, and I do believe this, and I think this is part of the Christian message fundamentally, is that there's actually no limit to that expansion. You know, because in some sense, like, we are this weird combination of finite and infinite. Like, we're related to the infinite in some manner, obviously, because the infinite exists, and here we are, and so we're related to it in some manner, and I don't know what manner that is, but I don't know what the limits are. It's like if you were the best person you could be, you know, truly, if you decided to live by truth and to aim at the good, and you really did that, you put your whole heart and soul into it, like you were, like that's what you were staking your life on, because you're staking your life on something. Who the hell could you be? And no one knows, you know. You know perfectly well you could be far more than you are. And you don't know what the upper limit of that is. And we certainly don't know what the upper limit would be if there were lots of people doing that. God only knows what problems we could solve. You know, there's lots of suffering and misery in the world. Plenty. And it's no wonder that people get bitter. But God, as you pointed out before, you know, we've got no shortage of ingenuity and possibility. And if we were serious about making things less wretched than they are, who knows what miracles we could pull off. Talking to my 19-year-old students, 20-year-old students who'd been in the formal education system for, say, 18, 15 years, and what I realized, it was within a course I was teaching called Maps of Meaning, which was based on the first book that I wrote. And it's a book about how our existence, even our perceptions, our motivations, our emotions are grounded in narrative. They're grounded in stories. You'll pay money to go see movies, to be instructed by stories. It's a very deep part of our character. In any case, I realized that my students hadn't ever really been asked to write their own stories. And, you know, you can write a story about who you've been, and you can write a story about who you are now.
But you can also write a story about who you could be. And you know, they had written essays on all sorts of abstract topics and been asked to think to some degree deeply about those topics, but no one had ever sat them down and said explicitly, okay, look, kid, like, here's the deal. You can have what you want and need, assuming you're taking care of yourself, right? Assuming that you're starting out with the proper attitude towards yourself, which is that you're worthy of care and respect, and there's something to you that's valuable that at least could be developed. You need to give yourself that amount of credit, like you would with anyone that you might be willing to attempt to care for and love. And then the next question is, all right, you can have what you want, but you have to specify it. What would you like from your friends 3 to 5 years down the road? What would you like your friendship network to look like? What would you like to do? How would you like your career to shape itself? How are you going to take care of your family? And what about children and a long-term mate, a wife or a husband? What are you going to do with your time outside of work that's useful and engaging and meaningful and productive? How are you going to take care of yourself mentally and physically? And how are you going to withstand temptation so that it doesn't take you down in the particular way that temptation might take you down? And so you're asked to write a few sentences, not to be obsessive about it, but to sketch it out like a bad first draft, you know? And then you're asked to write for 15 minutes. It's like, okay, it's 3 to 5 years down the road, and you have what you need and want to make your life what it needs to be, so that you can be a good person in the face of the suffering of life. What does it look like? And then we ask people to do the contrary, which I think is also useful, which is, all right, well, consider for a moment the multitude of your faults and the direction those faults could pull you in. And everyone knows that. Everyone has a sense of how they would fall apart in their own particular manner, with their own particular weaknesses. It's 3 to 5 years down the road, and you've let that part of your character dominate. What particular corner of hell is it that you're now occupying? And so now you have something to aim at. You have a purpose, right? And that's motivating. People need a purpose in life. You need a purpose neurochemically, because without a purpose, you don't feel any positive motivation or any positive emotion. Like, our positive emotion is linked to our pursuit of valuable goals. That's how our brains are set up. And so you need that positive goal, and also to stop you from being unduly uncertain and anxious because nothing is specified enough. And you need something to run away from. And so you can run away from the worst in you. You can escape from the worst in you, and you can move towards the best in you. And then we have people write out a strategic plan for the accomplishment of their goals. It's called the Future Authoring Program, by the way. It's available online at a site called selfauthoring.com, and we've tried it with thousands of university students now, and it's had a remarkable effect on their retention. The effect is approximately 25%. We decrease dropout by 25%. And it seems to be most effective for the most disaffected students. So it works better for men, because women are outperforming men academically. And it actually works better for non-Western ethnic minority men, having a tremendous impact on their likelihood of staying in university and also on their grades. And so we were speaking this morning about the potential utility of offering that to your online students, and in the hope that would. But the thing that was so strange to me when I was developing that program, and this was like, it was a miracle, a negative miracle of sorts. It just struck me as so palpably surreal that we would spend 15 years educating people and never once sit them down seriously and say, okay, look, you can craft yourself to some degree. You have the capacity to write your destiny, not in its entirety, but at least as a sequence of aims. And having done that, you need also to justify it. So for example, one of the things we ask people to do once they've specified a goal is to say, well, okay, imagine you achieved this goal. Okay, so why is that good for you? Why is it good for your family? Why is it good for your community? You know, because if you want to be locked in on a goal in a manner that's sufficient to take you through the trials that will occur while you're pursuing this goal, especially if it's a high order goal and it's difficult, then you need an explicit philosophy, a rationale for why this is worth pursuing. It's like, well, here's what it'll do for me in the sense of the development of my character and my capacity to deal with the world. And here's how it'll strengthen my family. And here's how it will benefit the community. And then having formulated those arguments, you have that body of carefully articulated thought that enables you to chase away the doubts that will inevitably accrue as you're attempting to do something difficult. You have to negotiate with yourself, and you have to justify what you're doing carefully and philosophically, deeply, so that you have the commitment and the strength of character that enables you to push through times that are difficult. And so, well, so we discovered that that hadn't been done, except in isolated cases. There were some business people who were working on similar projects, and a man at the University of Texas at Austin, James Pennebaker, and the program has been phenomenally successful, and thousands of people have now done it online. And so, and I'll close this by saying, if you have any interest in doing this, which I would recommend, it's also okay to do it badly, because a good first draft aim for your life is incomparably better than vague, nihilistic hopelessness. And you're not going to get it right anyways, because what do you know? You know, you're going to pursue your goal avidly for a year or so, especially at your age, and you're going to learn a bunch, and then your trajectory is going to shift. But it doesn't matter, because the trick is to get the process of moving forward toward the aim started, and then to have the humility to make course changes along the way as you inform yourself.
I noticed that there's always a group of my friends who always criticize what I'm saying and not even try to understand where I'm coming from. And I've always wondered how to deal with that. I mean, I want to listen to what they are saying, but they're not understanding they're not trying to listen to what I'm saying. So what would you do in that situation?
I'm going to answer that very briefly. Okay. There's a line in the New Testament that's relevant to that. Do not cast pearls before swine. And what that means is that if people are not listening to you, stop talking to them. And that is the best piece of advice that I can give you. And what happens is that if you stop talking to people who aren't listening to you and start watching them instead, they will tell you what they're up to. But so if you have things to say them, but you find people that will listen, talk to them. The ones who aren't listening, pull back. Because you're devaluing what you have to say by offering it to an audience that does nothing but reject it. And that's a good guideline to life in general. So pull back.